Good evening. Welcome to the April 18, 2023 City Council meeting. The meeting is hereby called to order. Members of the public may attend this City Council meeting in person or may watch and listen remotely by viewing the meeting on Channel 8 WCTV and at the city's website at www.wayzata.org/WCTV. Public comment during the public forum and/or public hearing portions of the meeting may be provided in person at the meeting in advance or by logging into the Zoom call and raising your hand during the public hearing. When your name is called in the meeting, you will be seen and heard in our council chambers and the cable channel. You will be asked to unmute and then you may begin your comment. All public comments must include your full name and address. Second item this evening on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I would ask everyone to please stand and follow along. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The third item on this evening's agenda is the roll call. Please note that all members of the council are present this evening. Also, I'd like to note that earlier this evening, the council participated in a workshop where we discussed the following topics. We reviewed a memorandum of understanding with the Wayzata Conservancy for Panaway Boardwalk and docks maintenance and operations reimbursement. And then we also discussed updates to the Panaway naming and dedication signage standards and draft proposal/pledge agreement for donation from the Karish family. The next item this evening is to approve the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as is, or would anyone like to make any changes?
So moved.
To approve the agenda as is?
To approve, yes.
Yes, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The motion passes. Next up this evening is the public forum. As a reminder for those members of the public who are in attendance this evening and are interested in speaking, we ask that you please state your name, address, and indicate if you are representing a group. We also ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. If the item you wish to speak about is something that is on the agenda, for those that are in person, please fill out a form at the table at the back of the room and hand it to staff. For those that are watching via Zoom, please send a note via chat to staff and let them know what agenda item you'd like to speak about. We also require that your camera is turned on when you speak. We do have a couple of items this evening on our public forum. The first is an update of the Wayzata Historic Society Strategic Planning and Consolidation Project by Aaron Person, Wayzata Historic Preservation Society. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'll ask Mr. Person to come up. I want to make a correction real quick. I named the Historical Society, just Wayzata Historical Society. That matters because there's we have the Preservation Board, or the Heritage Preservation Board here that's affiliated with the city. The Historical Society is actually a separate entity. But Mr. Person's here to give us an update. There's a lot going on at the Historical Society. He's got some exciting news to share and talking about an up-and-coming event.
Good. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Jeff. Madam Mayor and members, my name is Aaron Person, and I am the president of the Wayzata Historical Society, which, like the city manager said, is a separate entity from the city. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we've been in operation since 1982. We have our mission is to discover, preserve, and promote and share, disseminate the history of Wayzata and the greater Wayzata area. And we operate the Wayzata Depot Museum down at the depot on the lake. And we also operate, sorry if the sound is having
Oh, it's
issues.
good. It's good.
And we also operate the Wayzata Historical Society Archives, which is located in the lower level of the Wayzata Library, right across from the parking lot here. I wanted to provide an update on a project that we've been involved with for the past few years. So for nearly 4 years already, after years of careful study and consideration, the boards of 4 local historical societies around Lake Minnetonka have unanimously approved a plan of consolidation. That includes the Wayzata Historical Society, the Excelsior Lake Minnetonka Historical Society, West Tonka Historical Society, which is located in Mound, and the Museum of Lake Minnetonka, which is essentially is the Steamboat Minnehaha, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This plan of consolidation now goes to the memberships of each of these organizations, which are all 501c3s, for their either approval or denial. And that will be happening in late May, so about 6 weeks or so from now. Under this plan, our hope/vision would be that the museums are operated as is, and that programming would continue as it is, and if not, be improved. So for here in Wayzata, the Wayzata Depot Museum would continue to operate as we do. However, our hope would be that hours would be expanded. As it relates to the archives space over at the Wayzata Library, our vision would be to consolidate everyone's archives and have them be located here in Wayzata at the Wayzata Library. So Wayzata would be gaining a lot from this potentially. The Wayzata archives are currently the only location capable of housing everyone's collections. It's the only space that's large enough. It's also ideal as an archival storage space because it's climate controlled and dry, and it's just a good facility. The memberships, as I said, the plan is to have them vote in late May. However, if it goes through, the effective date would not be until October 1st, and we anticipate it would take a while for any changes to actually happen. So it would be kind of a slow process to get the collections moved up here if it does happen. We encourage the members on the City Council to attend informational meetings that are happening in early May. Here in Wayzata, here in this room, we are having an informational meeting about this entire plan. It's a Q&A session, and we'll have a lot more information. That'll be on May 4th at 7 o'clock in this room. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Person? A question of staff. How does that affect our charter for this group?
Madam Mayor, it doesn't really, since they are a separate entity. Really, our relationship with the Historical Society is just as a community partner. We're aligned in many things that we do. And then they all also lease the space at the depot and the library, which we've updated recently. And we're still not sure if we need to update that again if there is a consolidation, because really the additional area would be pretty minor, but we'll work through that. But other than that, there's really no charter implications to us.
Okay. If this were to move forward, where would the collective group then be meeting on an ongoing basis, and how would that look in terms of even naming? That's a big undertaking in and of itself.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor. The name of the new organization under this plan of consolidation would be Lake Minnetonka Historical Society. It would be incorporated here in Wayzata, using the depot address, which we currently use for Wayzata Historical Society because we can receive mail there. Was there another part to your question?
No, I think.
Sorry. Okay.
Thank you. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I know it's been challenging the last few years, certainly, to find volunteers, and we certainly thank over the course of the many decades, all of the tireless work that the Historical Society has put together, and look forward to many more years to come, regardless of whether there's a consolidation that takes effect or not. It is very much appreciated, and the informational sessions that all of you put together for the community and the archiving of records is very much appreciated to help maintain our history and to pass that on for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're excited.
Okay, we are still in the public forum, and I have one person who would like to speak during the public forum, and that is Marilee Badcock. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, staff. Marilee Babcock, 337 Reno Street, and I'm here to invite you and this wonderful audience here to Earth Day, which is this coming Saturday. We're going to hold Earth Day right up here in front of the community room, and we have a number of opportunities. It's going to be held from 1 to 3, and we're giving away small trees. We've got 5 different varieties: maples, oaks. You can win a large tree from Otten Brothers. We'll have a drawing for 2 large trees from Otten Brothers. We also have the seedling giveaway, and then we have a tree sale, but the tree sale time has already closed to get your order in for the tree sale. So we also have programs for children. And we have a champion tree contest. Who has the largest tree in Wayzata? How big is that tree? We have a $100 gift certificate from Kelly and Kelly, which I think is very nice for something like that. And if you think that big oak tree in your yard is going to live forever, it's not, so we've got to start planting new oak trees for the birds, for the rodents, for all of wildlife. So just wanted to invite all of you to that, and I think it's going to be fun. It's a good committee.
Any questions for Marilee? No? Well, Marilee, I had a podcast today, or recorded it with Bennett
good.
Myron, our city forester. So we talked a lot about trees.
Good.
We talked for over an hour. So I was trying to
pretty
channel you during that time, and you were coming through loud and clear. But we talked about the big woods, all of your efforts there as well, and all of the amazing things that you're all doing. And so with Emerald Ash Borer that's come to town, and the loss of some of those trees there, and some of the efforts through Earth Day, our canopies at 36%. Currently, our target, which would be ideal, gold standard, would be 40%. So we are looking to increase by 4%. So go get a free tree and
We can make it.
increase the canopy.
We can do
Exactly.
it. Right.
Yes, Jeff.
I just wanted to thank you for putting on an incredible sap accumulation.
Tree tapping.
Sap tapping or tree tapping, and I had a lot of fun doing it. It was really interesting. And
Councilmember Parkhill, you might turn on your mic.
We want to
I
hear.
should just leave it on, I guess. No, but as a community, we tapped about 500 gallons of sap from maple trees, and we distilled it down to about 10 or 12 gallons of syrup.
syrup.
And everybody got some, and it was a nice community event, and Marilee led that up, and she did more than her fair share. So thank you.
Well, it's a great, it's a great program. I think we have a lot of fun. There are always new people that are coming and trying this and finding out the value of those sugar maple trees. Yeah, so it was fun. And thank you for being such a great participant. You were wonderful. You were wonderful.
And we're a little partial. We think we make the best maple syrup in the state, don't we? Absolutely. And with Marilee's help. So thank
do.
you very much, Marilee.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else in the public forum? No? All right. That'll take us to item number 6, which is new agenda items. Council, does anybody have any new agenda items they'd like to bring up for a future discussion?
Nope.
No? No. All right. Seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. This evening, we have approval of the City Council workshop and regular meeting minutes of March 21, 2023. We have approval of the check register, approval of municipal licenses, receipt of police activity report, receipt of the building activity report, receipt of the 2022 fourth quarter financial report. We have award contract to Mint Roofing for the City Hall roof replacement project. The next one is award contract to Mint Roofing for the fire station roof replacement project. Approval of professional services contract with Walker Consultants for inspection of the Mill Street parking ramp. And lastly, approval of the cooperative agreement with Hennepin County for fiscal sponsorship of state LRIP grant. Council, any items that you would like to pull for further discussion or any questions? All right, seeing that there are none, would someone care to make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been first and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes as well. All right, moving on through our agenda this evening. It takes us to old business. And the only item under old business today is item 8A, to consider adoption of Resolution 19-2023, approving a subdivision at 1030 Lake Street East. Before we have the city manager introduce the item for discussion, I understand Councilmember Iverson would like to address the council.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I would like to unrecuse myself from this application. I'd recused myself previously on this item because I wanted to avoid the appearance of conflict of interest due to the fact that my property is currently on the market in the same neighborhood. However, after much thought and talking with the city manager as well as with our lawyer, there is no conflict that would preclude me from engaging in this conversation. A big part of it was given the interaction and the amount of interest from the neighbors. I feel that it's very important that we have a full council vote on this, so I will be participating in this vote tonight.
Great, thank you, Councilmember Iverson. All right, city manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Community Development Director Gellner is going to walk us through this item, I think with the help of Assistant Planner Quarles as well.
Yes, Assistant Planner Quarles worked on this application, so I'd like to have her give the presentation this evening, and then we'll be available for any questions.
Okay, just a quick note. It sounds like your microphone might be cutting in and out a little bit.
Okay. Thanks.
They tend to give us trouble from time to time, don't they?
Just at the best times. Hello, council. Hello, everybody. Tonight we're going to be talking about the subdivision application at 1030 Lake Street East. This is an abridged version of a presentation that the council and planning commission have seen before, but just wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page, as it's been a little bit since we fully considered this particular item. The motion in front of you will be to adopt Resolution 19-2023, approving a subdivision at 1030 Lake Street East. Just to review, the request for us is just for a major subdivision. It's to subdivide the current 1.12 acre parcel into 3. That would involve demolishing the current home and garage, and then the plan would be to build a new home on each of those 3 parcels. For a little bit of a timeline with this application, the City Council first saw it on March 7th, and were originally presented with a resolution of denial, which was reflecting the recommendation of the Planning Commission. At that time, the council directed staff to prepare a new resolution of approval for the subdivision instead. That resolution came to the City Council on March 21st. At that time, the council was unable to take action on the application, and so it was bumped to the next meeting. On April 4th, the council voted to table the item. At that time, there was some information gathering going on having to do with noticing of the DNR, our shoreland ordinance, and so we all wanted to take the extra time to make sure all of our ducks were in a row there. And now here we are at April 18th, considering the same resolution of approval that was presented to the council on March 21st. As a quick note, there is a 120-day deadline for council action. That deadline is May 5th. There is one more council meeting in there, but I just want to make sure that we're cognizant of that deadline. That comes from state law, and it's an incentive for councils and commissions to make sure that they consider items in a timely manner. After that deadline, applications are actually automatically approved. I'll go through our subdivision criteria briefly. This is just the first portion of them. One of them has to do with the comp plan, making sure that the subdivision is consistent, and the other has to do with zoning and making sure that the layout of the subdivision and building paths shall conform with all of the performance standards contained in the code. When it comes to the comp plan, the parcel in question is designated low-density residential. This is for the traditional single-family home developments around the city core and is generally 1 to 3 units per acre, primarily single-family homes. Central core residential, which is the striped just north of the property, is within the central core, is within the traditional core of the city. I note that this designation was created for the 2040 plan because everything that was central core residential on our land use designation map used to be low density until it was decided it made a little more sense to get more specific with our guidance and make sure that there was a higher density description for those really small core neighborhood parcels. So that in 2018 was applied to areas with existing densities of about 3 to 6 units per acre and generally houses single-family homes and duplexes. When it comes to zoning, all of those parcels that we saw are generally different land use designations, but they are the same zoning. So for single-family homes, that means minimum lot areas of 9,000 square feet, with lot widths and depths of 60 and 100. And then for all properties, regardless of whether they're single or two-family, those will be front and rear setbacks of 20 feet, sides at 10, 30% lot coverage, 35% impervious, and a building height of 32 feet to the peak of the roof. The other set of subdivision criteria generally has to do with the design of the subdivision itself and the context that that subdivision sits within. We generally want to see building pads that do their best to preserve sensitive areas and respect natural topography, retain existing stands of trees. We want to look at subdivisions that don't adversely impact the scale, pattern, or character of the city. We want to see subdivisions where the design is reflective of the surrounding lots and the neighborhood character, that those lot sizes are not dissimilar from adjacent lots or lots found within the surrounding neighborhood, and that those subdivisions don't depreciate the values of neighboring properties in the area. In terms of other things that have happened since the last time we had a full presentation on this particular application, there were 5 public comments received since March 21st. All of them do oppose the subdivision request, but they're also all from people who have commented previously, whether through additional written comments or at a meeting. We received public comments at actually most of the meetings that this application was on, even if they didn't necessarily receive a formal yes or no vote by the council. And generally, those comments are concerned about compliance with the comp plan, density, shoreline regulations, neighborhood character, and the wetland on the property. On April 4th, there was one additional letter received from the applicant's council in response to the neighbor's council, who had submitted one just a little bit before that. And then there's also one additional comment that's printed in front of you from March 4th, and I just wanted to make sure that was included for the record because it appears to have been missed in the packets beforehand. So that's just to make sure that that is wrapped up.
I'm sorry, which letter is that?
It'll be the one dated March 4th, and I don't remember the last name that's on it, but it won't be from a lawyer and it won't have pictures.
Lilyvold?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
To that end, the proposed motion is to adopt Resolution 19-2023, approving a subdivision at 1030 Lake Street East, and staff is happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ms. Quarles. Questions of staff? Jeff?
So there seems to have been some conversation about whether this complies with the comp plan or not, and I think there's 2 different opinions on it. My understanding is that the comp plan guides 1 to 3 units per acre. Does that give more, is there anything more specific about that other than 3 units in an acre? Does it have to be 1/3 of an acre per unit? Do we know? Do we have an opinion on that?
That's a good question, and it comes up because the lot size minimum for our 3A is a lot smaller than 1/3 of a unit per acre. When staff looked at this proposal and considered the density up against the comp plan, we looked at it on a total lot basis in that there is a lot that is about an acre. It's being divided into 3 parcels, and so in our interpretation, that's 3 units per acre.
Okay.
Good, thank you. Other questions of staff? No? Yes, Kathy.
Thank you. So do you take into factor that part of that lot is unbuildable when you look at that because of the wetland there? Was that ever discussed amongst staff?
May I ask a clarifying question? Do you mean in regards to density and how that's calculated?
Yes, please, yes.
Yes, and we did talk about that. We didn't factor in the density per buildable area. We looked at the density of the entire lot. One of the questions that could come up with this is, if there weren't a wetland there, is this something that could be potentially subdivided further under the rules of the R3A, minimum lot sizes being a lot smaller? In that case, the wetland is actually a big bonus because that is land that can never be built upon. So there's this built-in 3 units per acre limit because there's a whole wet section that will never have a house on it. So that was the extent to which we talked about it in that way.
Okay, thank you.
So I'd like to explore that a little bit more and build off of Councilmember Iverson's question. So when we traditionally, so if we're calculating hard cover per lot, are we taking into account the wetland?
Typically when we
Or
look at
the
it's a wetland.
wetland or the,
Or any water.
At the
or
water.
anything like that. No, great question. Typically, when we're looking at hard cover, the reason we look at it is to consider, what hard surfaces is rainwater hitting, traveling over, collecting, sediments, chemicals, all sorts of things before it eventually runs into Lake Minnetonka. When it comes to water on a property, our view is that the rain hits it, it doesn't collect anything else before flowing into a larger water body, and so we don't consider it when it comes to impervious surface, if that makes sense.
it does. So we use the same criteria that it's part of the lot. We don't separate that out to calculate for either size of lot, right, where it gets the density, or otherwise for hard cover. We don't start parsing that out either. So similar to if we weren't looking at a subdivision, if there's a wetland associated with that property and that property line goes into the wetland, that's part of the total lot, right?
Yes, and that's a very common situation actually throughout town with, property lines that come out into ponds or into large wetlands. That happens fairly frequently.
Okay, all right, thank you. I have one more question, but I don't know if anybody else has. So previously, we had also looked at, one of the major points of discussion was with regard to surrounding lot sizes. Do you have that parcel map that we can take a look at?
Yes. This was broken out, so this is every parcel in the neighborhood, basically, that's single family. I didn't include the promenade development just over there. In yellow is parcels that are between 0 acres and 0.19 acres. Those are the smallest parcels in the neighborhood. In green is parcels that are generally within the same proposed lot sizes as the ones in front of us, those 0.22 acre lots, and then all the way up to 0.29, and then anything that's over about 1/3 of an acre is in blue. And then I can also overlay the proposed development as well. So hopefully that gives a good idea of the context of the neighborhood and of that side of the street that the development is on, or the proposed development is on.
Okay, thank you. And then, trying to remember, we've had a couple of, at least one major subdivision in this neighborhood, certainly since I've been on the council. And that's where we actually ended up relocating, again, through the help of the Historical Society, I believe, the Wise House. So it was at the corner of Wise and Central. So it was was it the top 3 lots? It's the 0.26 to 0.23 and the 0.22. So that was all one lot, correct?
I would have to double check that particular subdivision.
Oh, I think it was before your time, Valerie.
Most things were
sorry.
before my time.
Was that,
Madam Mayor, I believe you're correct. It was one lot.
okay. Are there other properties that have experienced similar subdivisions within the last, let's call it 5 to 10 years?
Yes, the other example in the neighborhood is actually just up at Central and LaSalle. It's that little wedge-shaped group of properties that are all 0.22 or 0.23. And that was 2 properties that became 4 properties, and each of those are about that 9,000 square foot lot minimum.
I'm sorry, you said it's Central and LaSalle?
Yep, so that, that corner on the.
Oh, that's right.
upper- Yep.
Okay. All right, and then didn't we have one also off of Hampton? Is that just further to the north? Or no, not Hampton. I'm trying to think of,
Madam Mayor, I think you're right, it's Hampton. Those two parcels that are almost towards the railroad tracks, the .31 parcels.
okay. I was thinking of the one further up, which is the one, Councilmember Iverson, that butts up behind the gas station. Well, it's not a gas station anymore, but it's,
Oh, I'm thinking that's on, we can't know where this, it's where Gordy Straka lives. Yeah.
yes, what's the name? There was a subdivision there too, wasn't there?
I don't believe so.
I think at 1022 Wayzata Boulevard, we did a lot combination that would have used all the subdivision terminology, but I don't recall what the lot splits were over there.
Huntington is a street.
Huntington, I think there was, where there was a single-family home and they did subdivide to another property.
I can-
But that's further to the north here, is that, okay. But they do tend to, those have been approved because those met those general lot size requirements, and that's, I mean, that's what we're evaluating today, correct? Okay. All right, and the ones that are in yellow, are those just old properties that have always been typically smaller lot sizes?
For the most part, yes. A lot of those tend to be legacies of a lot of interesting land trades and property line moves and old properties. I don't know that every single one of them is that way, but I know that in the last probably decade or two at least, we probably weren't approving lots that were that undersized.
I would agree. Okay, thank you. All right. Any questions? I'll check again. No? All right. So we do have a number of people here this evening, so just I want to make sure I can get to everybody. But I also would like to just reiterate, so this is a public meeting, but it is not a public hearing. So the public hearing occurs at the Planning Commission. However, one of the benefits of being in a small town is that we open things up perhaps a little untraditionally, and we want to hear from neighbors. So we welcome you to come forward, and if you'd like to speak about this issue. What we would ask is that we have received emails. We have received, staff has received communication. Those have been published as part of the record. We have personally received emails that have been forwarded to staff so that they are part of the record as well. And we have folks who are here that have made comments to the council. So if there is something new that you would like to address about this issue, we would welcome you to make those statements. But we would ask, in the interest of time and efficiency, if there is nothing new and pertinent that we haven't heard to this point, then, you know, if you could please just raise your hand, let us know, and we'll move on to the next individual. That would be appreciated. So with that, the only other request from the council would be that we ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes so that we can give everybody an equal opportunity to speak. So with that, first up this evening is Dr. Chet Whitley.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'll keep my comments very brief. I'm not going to read from the 355-page report, the 2040 document, but I will note that Mayor Mouton...
We thank you for that, because I think you might be over your 3 minutes if that were the case.
Oh, I'm done? No, I certainly won't. But Mayor Mouton and Mr. Alec Pleckus, who were part of the City Council, acknowledged in the beginning of it, and Kathy Iverson, Councilwoman Kathy Iverson, and Jeffrey Parkhill were also part of the Planning Commission on the document. I appreciate Ms. Quarles, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly, for picking out figure number 3-4, which shows how distinctly different the properties are south compared to north of Lake Street, that they clearly are intended in the 24 document to be distinct and different. I think the pond there does cause some problems, But more to the point, it's important to note that 6 of the 7 homes on that street have been dramatically renovated or entirely replaced in just the past 8 years. And that's entirely consistent with the 2040 plan. That one dilapidated house is inevitably going to be replaced. And I think it's befitting that the rest of the evolving neighborhood is respected. All of those lots are 100 foot in contrast to the subdivision, which would be only 65 feet. My own analysis of a 3-lot subdivision versus a 2-lot subdivision is that really the Planning Commission does recognize formally and informally the 2-lot subdivision. And that point was made as cited in Wayzata.com that reported on that meeting. It uniformly rejected this subdivision into 3 pieces. I think it is not consistent to divide that lot into 3 compared to 2 as established in the building code, and that was discussed and will be discussed again. The aesthetics of row houses in that neighborhood on that lake is quite different from everything above, the yellow and green houses. It's quite distinct aesthetically. Economically, if we put 3 smaller row houses south of Lake Street, it's an entirely different aesthetic, and it's going to decrease the overall neighborhood tax base. 2 large houses on that same lot makes a lot of sense. And in fact, the Planning Commission endorsed that, and I think it will enhance the overall tax base of the overall neighborhood. Ecologically, it takes down more trees. There were originally, I believe, according to Bennett, 52 trees on that lot. It's now about a third of that, and he's said that there's more going to come down when the emerald ash borer is removed. So when you think about the bird life, think about that canopy. We lost, 3 or 4% of the canopy in this past year? Some of it could have been those big, huge trees, and they're going to be replaced by small trees with a 6-inch diameter. We're not going to see any canopy for 100 years. That's how old those big trees are. The developer's business model could go either way. I'm not an expert, but talking to friends and people who would be knowledgeable, the developer can do quite well financially by building 2 large homes, so have no limitation on the cost that they can charge for those homes. Whereas if we have 3 houses, it's going to be a very small home. It's going to be delimited just by the intrinsic design. With a 65-foot front, you're going to see a big garage and a small entryway, and that's about it. That's what you're going to see from the street. So I also hope that the council would recognize that there is a large neighborhood contingency that is concerned about how this is handled, and I think the credibility of the council listening to its neighbors will be strongly endorsed if it rejects a 3-lot division. I think everybody that I'm aware of in the neighborhood will be quite happy with the Planning Commission's recommendation for a 2-lot subdivision. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Again, I would ask if the points that you want to make this evening were in your email or in your communication to council, that you reference your email, and, we don't need to repeat what we've already received and read, sometimes multiple times. Question about the trees. So there is a lot of discussion about the trees. Did this applicant remove the trees?
A subset of the trees were removed by the previous owner of the lot, and others of the trees are proposed to be removed by this applicant. When we look at the total of removed trees, we are including both because those original trees were removed in anticipation of development.
By this applicant?
No.
No. Okay, so I want to make it very clear. This applicant did not remove the trees for this proposal.
No,
There
not the-
are additional trees that will, as part of the plan, being proposed to be removed. And am I encapsulating that correctly, that history correctly?
Yes.
Okay. So would that be similar to any one of us buying a piece of property where the previous owner has decided to cut down trees and now, but I still have to take responsibility for those trees having been cut? There is an assumption that that falls within my purview if I'm looking to redevelop my lot, correct? According to our ordinance?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And we have a tree mitigation plan as well?
There is a tree preservation plan included with the application materials.
Okay, but there's also mitigation plan for this property, is there not? Like to replace with the trees, so tree replacement, or, I know I'm using the wrong terminology, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Yes, there are trees proposed to be planted as well as preserved.
Okay, thank you. All right, next up this evening, we have Jeff and Stephanie Martha. Oh, that's for, pardon me, that's for Ferndale. Jeff Nelson. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Mayor Mouton and City Council members. A couple of points that I had not previously made when we talked about this. And first, I'm going to ask Valerie, because I sent 2 pictures of the lot from last Friday and you sent an email back Monday morning saying that it would be included in the council packet, and I haven't seen any of that. Do you have those pictures that you'd be able to show them?
Yes, so those pictures are printed out for the council. They're up on the
okay.
dais, and there is another copy available on the table.
I just wasn't aware of that, so that's fine. So
Excuse me.
and the point being that because of with the snowfall melt, the wetland expanded to include the area of boundary, the excess area, and at least from what I can see of the lot and of the wetland, it was right up to the edge of where the proposed house in Lot 1 would be built. But anyhow, I just simply wanted to make sure that, and I mentioned to Dan Vanderheyden as well about, and he hadn't, at any rate, so just for awareness about that. Second
Excuse me, Mr. Nelson?
Sure.
If you would please provide your address for the record.
Excuse me. I live at 1037 Lake Street East.
Thank you.
And so we are immediately across from the proposed lot subdivision. Thank you. The second thing that I wanted to point out is that I just was realizing when I looked at the information from January, February, March, and April, that there's some significant conflicts and changes. This is from the March 7th council packet, where there was the report from the Planning Commission in terms of Section 3 findings. And in those findings, it says that, so this is the report to the council. It says the proposed subdivision is not consistent with other parcels within the comprehensive plan, item number 1. Number 2, the building pads that would result would not adequately preserve sensitive areas. Number 3, existing stands of significant trees would not be retained, blah, blah, blah. Next number, the creation of the lots would adversely impact the scale, pattern, or character of the surrounding neighborhood. So there's 7 points in that, but they are all saying that the proposed subdivision does not meet the criteria that the city has in terms of its comprehensive plan, et cetera. Then when you read the March 19th council, all those things, all those findings of fact are suddenly reversed. And I guess I don't understand how facts change from one meeting to another meeting.
That's a good question, and I think we can,
So at any rate.
did you have more questions? Because I'd like to answer that question for, well, I will ask staff to answer that question for you. I know the answer, but did you have anything else, Mr. Nelson, that you would like addressed?
I think that
or any
others will
statements?
be making the points
Okay.
that I would, so please go ahead.
Very good. So, City Manager, would you care to walk through how that change occurs, the process?
Happy to, Madam Mayor. So the language that Mr. Nelson was referring to was the recommendation that the Planning Commission relayed over to the City Council to consider at the next meeting. I believe the subsequent language or memos that Mr. Nelson was mentioning was just a further evaluation from staff. So it's one's from the Planning Commission and the other is a different perspective and a different group providing information about the application.
Would it, I don't remember the exact dates, but would that not have been when we sought to have new findings of fact for
Right.
the approval as opposed to the denial?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, but again, I would
Thank you.
point out that you can't change facts. I mean, I understand the reality here is that somebody wanted to change the council's approach to this, and the so-called facts that were presented in a subsequent packet were changed from what, and so when the Planning Commission votes 5-0 to deny the application, and then things get reversed, it just makes one wonder what's going on. So again, I thank you respectfully for your time. You all
Thank
work
you, Ms.
hard, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Okay. Next up, we have, is that Mark Thiroff? Yes?
Is it on?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Can't hear it very well. I'll be very brief. My name is Mark Thiroff. I represent JC and Jason Grace, who own the property immediately to the east of 1030 Lake Street. They unfortunately couldn't be here this evening. My address is 100 Washington Avenue South in Minneapolis. I have just two brief comments. I will not repeat what I've already written to you in the letter that's in your meeting packet. I wanted to address Councilmember Parkhill's question about the calculation of density across the proposed plat. There is a very specific answer and process for doing that in your zoning ordinance. It's found in section 919.07. That ordinance section identifies the types of subdivisions where it is permissible to calculate the density across the entire plat, and all of those circumstances are plats that involve multifamily housing. The obvious implication of that is that a plat that involves single-family homes only is not eligible for a plat-wide density calculation, and that means that the density for each lot has to be calculated for that lot. So you have to determine whether each of these three lots falls below the 1 to 3 dwelling units per acre density cap in your planning or in your comprehensive plan. Lots 2 and 3 do not meet that standard. They have density in excess of 1 to 3 dwelling units per acre. I was very confused as to how the staff recommendation could be to approve this, given that your ordinance says very clearly how this is to be done. So I had a conversation with Mr. Schelzel about this just to try to get a better understanding of staff's position on this. And he told me that the ordinance I'm referring to is in the zoning ordinance, but this is a subdivision application, so that only standards found in your subdivision ordinance are relevant and not standards found in your zoning ordinance. And I found that very surprising, because I deal with subdivision ordinances all over the state of Minnesota, and I think in just about every single one I've seen, the subdivision ordinance says any proposed lot has to comply with the standards in the zoning ordinance. And so after the call, I had to look at your subdivision ordinance, and sure enough, in section 1006.01, it says, and I quote, "A proposed subdivision shall conform to the comprehensive plan and related policies adopted by the city and to the official zoning ordinance of the city." So I don't know how it's possible to ignore 91907 and suggest that the density analysis is to be calculated across the entire subdivision. It's just inconsistent with your ordinances. Secondly, I wanted to point out that if you're going to use this information regarding other lot sizes in the area and other subdivisions, I would encourage you to ask the question whether any of those other subdivisions that you've talked about involved land-guided low-density residential with the same 1 to 3 dwelling units per acre requirement we have here, and to inquire whether in those cases section 919.07 was correctly applied in determining the density of those lots. The last thing is just to note for the record, and it may be my own mistake, I may have missed it. I heard a reference to a letter from the applicant's attorney in response to my letter. I learned of that for the first time this evening. I don't think I've ever seen that in a meeting packet. Perhaps I missed it. Thank you.
There are copies available at City Hall, certainly.
Madam Mayor, yes, there are. We can provide copies if one is requested. That particular letter that the attorney was talking about was received right before the last meeting, so it was not part of that packet, and it was not part of this packet, but it is into the record, and it's able to be reviewed publicly.
Is it on the website as something that's
I don't think so.
Okay. So we could provide a copy to the gentleman if you'd like a copy.
Absolutely. And I'm guessing, never mind.
Okay, thank you. City Attorney, any questions or clarification based on the statements that were made there? I mean, it sounds like you're referencing the subdivision ordinance and
Madam Mayor, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I would disagree with the characterization of my communication with the attorney there.
okay,
What I have said, what I said to him and what I have said to you here in these meetings is that we're looking at approval of a subdivision. So we start with the subdivision ordinance and the criteria there. And the ordinance does point us to the comprehensive plan. It points us to the zoning ordinance. So at no time have I ever said that we ignore the zoning ordinance or the comp plan. So I disagree with that
okay,
characterization.
thank you. All right, we have 2 more people who would like to speak on this issue. And the next person is David Gagne. Good evening. If you could introduce yourself, and I apologize, I ask you every time, did I pronounce your name correctly?
I respond to all pronunciations.
Very good. You may be
Gagne
called
is
all.
fantastic.
at the end of the day.
I am called all. Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
So, Madam Mayor, City Council members, thank you for your time and your service. Greatly appreciated. Thank you for all being present here this evening. Really appreciate it, and thank you for all participating.
May we have your address, please?
David Gagne, 298 Central Avenue South. The light blue .3 just south of LaSalle Street on Central Avenue. Previously of 1044 Lake Street, the house immediately to the east. I'm here in front of you as a concerned resident, taxpayer, and neighbor in that community. My wife and I have invested millions in that neighborhood, and we're deeply concerned and asked the committee to not approve, the city council to not approve this proposal. In the summer of 2020, my wife and I met with the city planning team, Nick Kaiser, with a Caldwell Banker real estate agent. We sat down with Nick to talk about potentially acquiring this actual property. We talked to him about the capabilities of subdividing that property, whether it could be 2 or 3 lots. And we were told by the planning commission, by that planner, that based on the comprehensive plan, based on the subdivision criteria, and what was going on with the trees in that neighborhood, specifically with the subdivision criteria in terms of the adjacent lots, the trees, et cetera, that a plan would not be approved for 3 lots. 3 years later, I'm sitting here and you're ready or proposing to approve this under the same criteria, the same comprehensive plan. So I don't understand that from that perspective. I'm sitting here tonight. I'll just make a few more other comments that I haven't made in the past. I want to encourage you and I want to ensure accountability regarding your actions and decisions concerning this property. Holding those in power accountable for their actions and explaining those actions and decisions is the essence of democracy. I'm asking you to account to your fiduciary responsibilities as elected officials. And I'll talk about that in a few seconds. But specifically, the city's required to fire the comprehensive plan has been talked about here this evening, not to disregard it. You're required to soundly assess this application against the full set of established subdivision criteria, not to bend or cherry pick that criteria or certain criteria to support an opinion. As mentioned here, several of the criteria in this application do not pass muster with the subdivision criteria, let alone the comprehensive plan. And I just ask you and encourage you tonight to have a material deliberation and decision based on the facts centered on these matters, not on opinion, not on bias, and not on anything that may not be with regard to those criteria and those rules. You have a set of laws, legal precedent, et cetera, that are in front of you that I would ask you to sincerely consider. What I didn't hear this evening was any response from the city council or in the last meeting or here or the team in front of me with regard to the legal issues raised by the Grace's attorney. not only the issues that were sort of reinvigorated tonight from that perspective, but also with regard to the Shoreline Overlay District and some of the issues with the Watershed District. So I'm not sure why those haven't been brought up, and I'd like to hear more about those. I also want to support Mr. Nelson's comments about the fact that the Planning Commission voted unanimously, and now you're sitting here to overturn it, yet I haven't heard any real reasons behind supporting that. I've heard that the same people basically now gave you different criteria, and I don't understand that. Again, I haven't heard anything that explains that or makes sense of that. I also agree with the attorney in terms of the neighborhood. One of the things I heard from you in our last meeting was that the builder builds nice homes. And that's an opinion. I actually agree with that opinion. The applicant does build great homes, but that's not necessarily part of the criteria within this. Whether your neighborhoods that you live in and your neighbors don't have a problem with 65-foot lots is irrelevant to the discussion and the decision with regard to this fact or what's in front of us here today. So I would ask you to consider these with regard to the comprehensive plan and to the subdivision criteria. Two other points I want to make with regard to the subdivision criteria. Valuations of homes. The home at 1044 Lake Street, which this parcel of land is guided differently than the rest of the neighborhood. The home at 1044 Lake Street sold for $4 million, almost $4 million. Very different from the rest of that neighborhood. The homes on Gardner Street that you mentioned in one of the previous meetings that the builder has built up on the north side of Wayzata Boulevard, very similar to the home that would be in this neighborhood. Those homes in that neighborhood, I think that home sold for about $1.8 million. In the last 3 years, not a single home north of Wayzata Boulevard is sold for $2.5 million. This is a very different area, very different zoning, very different feel to this neighborhood. All the other homes in the last 8 years that have been regentrified in this neighborhood, south of LaSalle Street and Y Street in that mini area, even north of that, are all fit the character of that neighborhood, all fit the footprint of those lots, and are not, and this is completely inconsistent. The final point I'll make, which I haven't made before, is if you take the property at 1044 Lake Street, even with in the current layout, you couldn't fit 2 of those homes on those 3 lots. With that wetland, you're literally going to have something that looks like nothing else in that area. So back to the comprehensive plan and the subdivision criteria, I don't see how you can approve this. I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Gagnon. Okay. I don't see that anybody, do we have anybody online?
Madam Mayor, we do not.
Okay, very good. Well, we're not going to have a back and forth amongst lawyers on the spot. I think any attorney in the room would understand why that would not occur. So we'll let the lawyers, if they choose to continue to discuss it, can discuss it outside of my meeting here this evening. So with that, I will turn it over to council for a conversation or questions of staff based on what's occurred. But it sounds like we do need, beyond this one issue, and understandably, these are not the most exciting meetings to be attending until they occur in your neighborhood. But procedurally speaking, I think that there is some confusion as to how we get to where we are. So I think it would probably behoove us to cover that. We have a couple of our esteemed Planning Commission members here this evening. We have a great deal of respect for them. They act as an advisory board to the council. So applications go to the Planning Commission. That is the public hearing where they are required by law to take public comment. At that point, they deliberate and they come back with a recommendation. And that recommendation was to deny. It was a vote of 5-0. I think a full planning commission is 7 members. And then when the council received that recommendation, this body, who is ultimately responsible for making the decision, disagreed with the planning commission. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes we agree and we accept their recommendation, and other times we do not. What was discussed in terms of the resolution that was first prepared for us, the recommendation for denial, was based on that original recommendation. When we decided that that would not be the path of the majority of the council that evening, we asked staff to prepare a recommendation for approval. And so the subdivision criteria and the findings were outlined to support a recommendation for approval based on the discussion of the council. Did I encapsulate that as far as how we got to where we are in the changes? Okay, thank you. So with that, over time, this has been a complicated one. We've had people who have been gone. We have folks who have recused themselves, now non-recused themselves. We have information that has gone to all of the appropriate bodies. And we have received numerous comments. Certainly appreciate all of those comments. And we would like to, if there are no questions of staff, then I will turn it over to the council for them to deliberate. I do have one last person who would like to speak on the matter before our deliberation this evening. And I apologize, I overlooked this in my stack. Mr. Dan Vanderheiden would like to speak. Would you like to come up? Very good. Thank you so much. All right. So Mr. Vanderheiden, the applicant, is here if he would like to speak if we have any questions for him. So with that, I will turn it over to the council for deliberation. Who would like to begin?
Start.
Yes, Councilmember Plekish, thank you very much. And before you begin, thank you for changing your travel plans to be here so that we could have a full council for tonight's conversation. So for all of you present here this evening, fortunately at no cost out of pocket, as my understanding, but you did change your schedule and missed some events.
Yeah, I breezed in. I had time to change into my sport coat here. So let me start by saying that I too have a great amount of respect for the Planning Commission. 2 members are here, that was mentioned before. And what I will say and reiterate is that the recommendations of the Planning Commission are typically adopted, but not always. So there are times when the council does recommend something different than what the Planning Commission comes up with. In my personal recollection, I cannot think of a time when we overturned a unanimous decision by the Planning Commission. I could be wrong about that, but in my 6 years, I don't believe that's happened. That's kind of neither here nor there because I believe in this case the Planning Commission made the right choice, and I do have a lot of respect for them. There are honest differences of opinion here. Both sides hold firmly to their view, and they have good reasons for both. But I happen to fall on one side. It is my thought that the comprehensive plan and zoning seemingly are at odds in this case. That was brought to light in the very first meeting. And looking at the overall area for, and I've got some notes here for density, to me it is meant for a multi-family type of scenario. And this is indeed single-family situation. In my view, the south side is a different micro neighborhood. I've used that term in the past. It is different than the north side, and the comprehensive plan actually did cover that. That's why I think it is different, in my view. I went and walked it again, not this afternoon, I just flew in, but before I left on my trip, I went back there again just to try to visualize what it would be. And I believe that 3 homes on that lot, particularly when you account for the wetland, which constrains the other part of the buildable area, it just doesn't seem right. One of the things that was mentioned earlier tonight is in the map that I think is up in the screen behind me, is a reference to another lot subdivision that we had approved, and 4 homes were built on it. And I remember that. In retrospect, I think that was a bad decision, because that's a case study in what happens if we make a bad decision. And in that case, the 4 homes that are crammed in there just don't look right. And I think if we did this today, the same thing would occur in this neighborhood. So again, that's a case in point to how things can go wrong. I do think the wetland plays into this in both the calculations and the aesthetics of what would be there. 2 homes on that lot make a lot of sense to me. visually and otherwise. It just makes a lot of sense. So I believe that we should deny this tonight and have a plan come back to show too.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Plekish. Who would like to go next?
I'd like to follow up on that.
Okay.
Thank you, Alex. You made some of the points that I was also going to bring up. But one of the first things I went back to and I decided to get in this conversation, something I don't read very often is the comprehensive plan. So I went back and revisited it. And one of the first things that is in there, it talks about fostering charm in a community known for its small-town character requires intentional and purposeful, strong focus on design and sending our developers back to the proverbial drawing table to bring a more tasteful, purposeful development. I agree with Commissioner Plekish that that is what is best fitted for this lot. I live next to the development where we took 2 lots and subdivided it into 4 lots. I've lived in the community for 25 years. That changed that neighborhood forever. Over 600 inches of trees were removed. 65-foot lots now require residents to park their cars on the street, which is something that hasn't been talked about tonight. There are homes there that have gravel pads to park cars because the size of the lots simply just do not allow enough parking for a size of that home and a family of that size. I was on the planning commission at that time. I voted in favor. I recommended hard for 3 lots. Again, I think 3 lots would have been appropriate for that. And I think 2 lots are appropriate for this. I also go back to one of the guiding principles that we should look at. And it talks about, sorry, I have a lot of notes. Building pads for proposed subdivision should preserve the sensitive areas of wetlands and most of the healthy trees currently on the property. It's quite sad that many trees were removed prior to this. 2 houses could have been placed, or perhaps 3 differently. But the canopy in our neighborhood and many other neighborhoods in the city is going away too quickly. Again, the next point number 3, talks about existing strands of significant trees. We talk about our trees over and over. Putting 2 houses on this could potentially save some additional big trees that are currently on that lot. The design of a lot, the building pad, and the site layout of the proposed subdivision responds to and is reflective of the surrounding lots and neighborhood character. I've heard some discussion when I recused myself about the different sizes of lots in our neighborhood. There are quite a variety of lots, but in the variety of lots are also smaller homes. Smaller homes that have green grass and large amounts of trees. That's slowly going away from this neighborhood, but many other neighborhoods in Wayzata. It's important for us to protect that, and that is why it's all part of our code and our ordinances. The proposed subdivision should tend to not depreciate the values of the neighborhood and properties. I don't have the Golden Globe to look into that to see if that will happen. But we don't have a $4 million home. That was like a shock to have that happen. And I think there's potential to bring in higher price points on 2 lots versus 3 lots. And again, I think a saying that I heard tonight, which is really true, is row houses. We don't have a lot of row houses. The 4 lots that happened are long, skinny lots, which created the essence of row houses in a neighborhood that really doesn't have that other than those. I feel my job on the council, and I ran on this, is to represent the voices of our community. And when I go back and look at our ordinances and our comprehensive plan, I can sit here tonight and say that I'm following those first. and listening to the voices of our residents at the same time. I would fully support 2 homes on the lots, but I cannot support 3.
Thank you, Councilmember Iverson. Councilmember Parkhill.
I can go. Got my microphone on. Thank you, members of the community, for your input, staff for your detailed preparation, council for your time and careful review, and of course the Planning Commission for your very thoughtful review almost 2 months ago. I have spoken to everyone who has contacted me about this project right up to 3:30 this afternoon when Elizabeth gave me a call. The immediate neighbors seem to be against the project, and several around the corner are okay with it. Hang on a second. I have considered the past trees, the existing trees, and reviewed the new tree plan. I have looked at the 10-foot setbacks which exist all over the neighborhood, including the adjacent house to the east and seemingly directly across the street. I have looked at the 2 houses south of Lake Street and considered 1030 with just those 2 houses as its own separate enclave, as well as looked at it at all, or looked at as part of the bigger, broader neighborhood. I have read everything that has been available on the subject, including the tree ordinance, the Planning Commission minutes, and reviewed the March 7 minutes. The question remains, should this be subdivided into 2 or 3 lots? How big a difference will that make? Certainly the immediate neighbors believe that it will make a huge difference. I really hadn't decided which direction I was going to go before I came in here. I have comments here, pros, and I have comments here, cons. The subjective nature of a lot subdivision is important to preserve our city neighborhoods, for council to have the ability to preserve the best aspects of our community, many of which are related to our natural landscape, which is definitely relevant to this lots. For weeks and in the middle of the night, I have asked myself, should this be 2 or 3 lots? The conclusion that I've come to is with the loss of so many trees in the broader neighborhood over the last 10 years and on the property already, I believe there could be an adverse effect to the immediate neighbors, and the community would be better served with 2-lot subdivision versus 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Parkhill. Councilmember McDonald.
Thank you, Mayor and Council and staff, and just like my colleagues up here, I've thanked quite a few people who have all been involved with this complicated application. So I extend my gratitude to those parties as well. This hasn't been an easy one. This has been pretty complicated for what I initially saw as a pretty simple application where we, define, look at the requirements for density and our zoning, and those requirements of what I've come back to time and time again, which is that it does fall within those requirements. I too have walked the neighborhood several times, considered trees, considered neighbors, but when it comes to definitions like row house, lakefront, charm even, those are things that aren't in our ordinances. They are subjective and they're nuanced. So I stick to what I've initially said in the previous meetings, that I'm okay with the 3 lots.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate everybody's perspective, certainly. We talked about some of the lots that have been subdivided. Some of you may live in some of them who are sitting here today. If anybody knows me or has followed me well beyond this issue, you would know that 99% of the time I have voted against the subdivision. And that is not something that I think anybody could deny who's sitting up here if they know my history. But when that has occurred, so Councilmember Plekish mentioned the 4 lots, and Councilmember Iverson, same size lots up on that corner up at LaSalle and Central. I voted against those. It's not just about lot size. There were a lot of factors: the shape of the lots, where the lots were situated, how they play in relation to, the rest of the neighborhood and how they were going to sit. We have a general idea of where the building pads are going to be. That's just the beginning. There is a big process yet ahead. Designs and where the house is going to sit and the building pads. The 3 lots at the corner of Central and Wise, I voted against that one. I wanted to keep the big lot on the corner with the house and try and preserve what an original neighborhood looked like. This, to me, is in keeping with what that neighborhood, and when I see neighborhood, it's beyond 4 houses on a street or 3 houses across the street. A neighborhood is encompassing of a larger swath of homes, property types, property sizes, and I think we've gotten all, kind of hung up on how all of this is with regard to trees from before and everything else, yet I don't hear a lot of people talking about the dozens of trees that this applicant is proposing to plant that he wasn't even responsible for cutting down. I said that I think that's a pretty responsible approach, and frankly, it's in our ordinance. You wouldn't have a choice. So that is part of the criteria that we would have. This doesn't require a variance. Yes, some of the houses are smaller on the lots, but if we have hardcover requirements, and so if a house was if we don't like the size of the house on a lot and it exceeds what we allow, then we would be looking at a variance. The houses we have, the zoning we have allows for a certain amount of hardcover. So short of a variance having been approved in this neighborhood, it's the way our zoning is written, and that is what I'm looking at here today, especially with the subdivision. And in terms of the findings, yes, I was the one who mentioned this developer has built nice homes on Walker Avenue. Those are the only ones I'm familiar with because I used to live on Walker. And that's important as well as we look at subdivisions. Is the type of home that's going to be built going to be consistent with our expectations as a city as homes are built? But in terms of the subdivision itself, we're never going to hit 100%. But what we need is a majority of the council to be able to articulate their findings of fact. And for me, I do find that the creation of the lots of this subdivision would not adversely impact. It is so consistent with everything else we see before us. Yes, there are a couple in blue there, but it's pretty darn close. The design of the lot and building pad responds to and is reflective of the surrounding lots and neighborhood character. I agree with that as well. The lot sizes that are proposed are not dissimilar from the lots found in the surrounding neighborhood. I too have to agree with that. The proposed lot layout and building pads that result from the proposed subdivision would conform with all performance standards contained in the subdivision ordinance. It does. no variance being requested. So the others are a little subjective. You know, the existing stands of trees, we deal with this all the time. And if this wasn't a subdivision, we wouldn't even be talking probably about the trees. If it weren't part of a development application. So suffice it to say that for me, I think it's a reasonable application. I think it is definitely aligned with and similar to the other lots in the neighborhood. I do think it would be within, it would not detract from the surrounding homes, and I think it would be an asset. We'd be looking at potentially what is the lot coverage allowed on each lot?
I believe 30% in R3A.
30%, okay. So, I mean, the argument of two lots, equal size, same hardcover percentage, the size of those homes, imagine. You take 50% of one lot and give it to one side and 50%, talk about McMansions. You're gonna have a half-acre lot. And that's kind of what we dealt with the other subdivisions. And so, you know, if somebody wants to max out their hardcover without a variance, they can do it. And if the neighborhood wants, you know, a big, massive house across the street, and maybe that's what they want. But that's not what this entire neighborhood is about. So, you know, are we talking about the people directly adjacent? They want a particular type of home, style of home as their neighbor? Or are they looking at the neighborhood in total? And I would argue that they're looking, afraid of what they're going to see out their window, as opposed to really taking into consideration all the other factors. So for that, I am in favor of a 3-lot subdivision, but it doesn't sound like we have a majority of the council that falls in aligned with that. So we have a resolution to approve, but we are in a position of having to reconsider that. So with that said, our options are to vote on, and I'd like to do a roll call vote, to vote on the resolution that's before us this evening, and then talk about our next steps once that's concluded. Okay. So would someone like to make a motion to approve resolution, let me get my glasses back on here, 19-2023, approving the subdivision at 1030 Lake Street East?
So moved.
Very good. Is there a second? I will second that motion. Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote, City Manager?
Councilmember McDonald?
Aye.
Councilmember Plekish?
Nay.
Councilmember Iverson?
Nay.
Councilmember Parkhill?
Nay.
Mayor Mouton?
Aye. A motion does not pass. So previously, we had a motion to, or pardon me, we had a resolution to deny. That was the first one that we were presented with. So I think what we should do then is, if you have that handy, can we take a look at that and look at the findings of fact, and those members who are in favor of the denial will need to state their case.
Yes, Madam Mayor, we can do that. I think Assistant Planner Quarles, Director Gellner is pulling up. We have kind of the summary and a slide of findings of fact that are essentially from before. We also have the actual resolution here we can walk through as well. It might be helpful to just go through this slide first, and then we can answer any detailed questions.
Do that.
This is the resolution to deny in a nutshell, the draft resolution that the Planning Commission approved, I think back in February.
On a technical note, the Planning Commission didn't approve the resolution, but this came out of the report and recommendation of denial that came from the Planning Commission. The findings were...
Do we have the original?
This is, the one that we have pulled up is that original resolution.
Okay.
And this is a summary of that. So there hasn't been any fresh resolution of denial prepared for this meeting. This is from that March 7th meeting is what you would have been presented with.
Okay.
And to keep it fairly brief, the findings are based off of the Planning Commission report and recommendation, and they find that the subdivision is not consistent with other low-density residential parcels or other parcels on the south side of the street specifically. It found that the subdivision would not adequately preserve sensitive areas or existing stands of trees, and it found that it would adversely impact the scale, pattern, character of the neighborhood through both the tree removal activity and the proposed density.
Okay, very good. So I will turn it to those council members who are not in favor of what was before us this evening to discuss the denying the if this, the document that we're, okay,
This is.
all right.
Mayor, I will make a recommendation following the Planning Commission's recommendation of denial for draft resolution number 11-2023, denying the subdivision at 1030 Lake Street East.
Right, are there specific, need you to look through the criteria that was originally presented? Is that criteria still the same? Can you expand on that criteria and why you feel that this motion for denial should go forward?
Well, I think I did in my previous statement, but if you could go back to the statement that the Planning Commission made recommendations for denial on. It's not consistent with the low-density residential parcels or other parcels on the south side of the street, would not adequately preserve sensitive areas and trees, would adversely affect scale, pattern, character of the neighborhood through tree removal and density.
Okay. Yes, City Attorney.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, just a point of clarification. I want it to be very clear for the record, the findings that you're basing your motion on, motion to deny the subdivision. The actual resolution that was prepared just cross-references the planning report and recommendation. There were a lot. The three you just read, I think, were key that staff identified. So just to be clear, are those the three findings you would base your resolution on?
Yes, without
Okay.
having time to review the document in
Okay.
great detail. If the
Okay.
three is adequate, then I will recommend the three unless I can have a few minutes to review the document.
So, Madam Mayor, as I hear the motion is to deny based on those three findings.
Okay, very good. Is there a second, or is there further discussion? We have a motion on the table.
Madam Mayor, if that is a motion, I will second it, but I have to admit, I'm a little confused why we're even doing this. We just voted on an approval and we denied it. Why do we then have to come back with a recommendation for denial? I mean, why do we have to do this? Is there a technical reason here that I'm missing?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember, no, at this point, no one's making a recommendation. You're actually taking action on this application. So the proposed action to approve it failed. So now we need to act to deny it.
Okay.
It doesn't happen automatically. In other words, council has to act by a majority vote to either approve or deny. So we need, since the approval motion failed, we now need one to deny. Does that make sense?
It does. That's legalistic, but I get that. So I'd be happy to second. And as far as articulating why I would approve a denial, I think I articulated that pretty well in my comments.
Well, we just want to make sure that it is aligned with what was presented before, and
Well, I think it is aligned, and I haven't changed my mind in the last 10 minutes. So.
didn't think you did. All right, excellent. So the motion's been first and seconded. Any further discussion? All right, let's take another roll call vote, please.
Councilmember McDonald,
Nay.
Councilmember Plekish?
Aye.
Councilmember Iverson?
Aye.
Councilmember Parkhill?
Aye.
Mayor Mouton?
Nay. Motion passes. All right, so we will have this then at our, no,
Madam Mayor, that's it.
we're good.
Yep.
Okay.
You have voted to deny that subdivision application.
All right, very good. Okay, we will move on then to our next item, which, under new business this time. And that is to consider adoption of Resolution 25-2023, issuing a negative declaration of need for an environmental impact statement for the Ferndale Bluffs residential project at 565 Ferndale Road West. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Director Gellner is going to walk us through this.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So applicant Witten Associates submitted a development application to subdivide the property at 565 Ferndale into 4 single-family residential lots in 2022. The proposal would require construction of a public road and cul-de-sac to serve 4 new homes, and each of the 4 new properties would also incorporate shoreline on PV Pond. In November of 2022, the city exercised its authority under Minnesota statute to order a discretionary environmental assessment worksheet, an EAW. And due to this supplemental process, the subdivision application that we had begun looking at for completeness of review was not deemed complete for review. In essence, the 60 or 120-day clock for the subdivision is paused while we conduct this EAW. So tonight, we'd like to review the results of that EAW with you and the record of decision. As part of this process, the applicant hired WSB for the work to be conducted, and so I have Allison Harwood of WSB, the Director of Natural Resources, here to present the results of this worksheet. We've also received an extensive amount of public comments that have been reviewed as part of this worksheet. And I think I'll stop there and turn it over to Allison for this presentation. I will note that the property owner, I would like to give just a brief couple-minute statement after we run through the details of the EAW. And I'll just note that this was not reviewed by the Planning Commission. That is not a requirement of an EAW. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Allison and begin the presentation of the EAW. Thanks, Mayor.
All right, thank you, Emily. Council members and members of the public, my name is Allison Harwood. I am with WSB, and as Emily mentioned, I was hired to assist the city with the development of this environmental assessment worksheet. I will note that at the end of this, the environmental review program is a pretty regimented process, and so part of that process is public comment, which we did take public comments and have provided responses to those, which are in your packet. At the end of this, while we will be able to hear from members of the public, we won't be able to respond to new comments. We can provide clarifications on comments that have already been received through March 13th. So this first slide here is just the project location. So as mentioned, this is a subdivision of a lot that is just adjacent to PV Pond. So first, I'm going to discuss some of the environmental assessment worksheet process. I'll also discuss another process, which is essentially what will be determined whether it's necessary tonight, which is the environmental impact statement. I'll be using several terms tonight, and so I wanted to go over some of those terms and definitions. EQB refers to the Environmental Quality Board, and that's the state body that oversees the state's environmental review process. EAW, as I mentioned, is the environmental assessment worksheet. EIS is environmental impact statement. The RGU is the responsible government unit, or the city of Wayzata. LGU is a local government unit, same city of Wayzata. And when we refer to significant, we are referring to a process that cannot be undone or addressed through a formal review or permitting process. So what is an EAW? And I apologize if my audio is going in and out a little. It's a state environmental review document. It consists of approximately 20 questions about basic project analysis, and we'll talk about what those 20 questions are later in the presentation. The purpose The purpose, I don't know. The purpose of the document is to determine whether an environmental impact statement is needed or not, determine if there is potential for significant environmental impact as a result of the project, and to inform future permitting. It's important to note that the EAW process or the EIS process does not approve or deny a project. It's simply a document that helps with future planning for whatever their particular development is, so that both the responsible government unit and other permitting agencies have a kind of a roadmap to what is expected. I'll also briefly talk about the environmental impact statement process. This is a much larger review process than an EAW. It's a thorough study of the project's environmental impacts and a comparative analysis of economic and sociological effects. It's reserved for projects with the potential for significant environmental impacts. And again, those are impacts that cannot be undone or planned or mitigated for through another formal process. It gives the RGU information to determine if a project is environmentally acceptable. It also would outline mitigation measures. Again, it does not approve or deny a project. It is a quite lengthy process, typically takes over a year to complete the EIS process, and it comes at a pretty substantial cost. They're typically, well into the hundreds of thousands of dollars to go through that process. So what types of projects typically require an EIS? There are mandatory triggers. So for example, something in the shoreland, which would be similar to this, where this project is located, it would be development of 200 or more unattached or attached units, or construction of a new or expansion of an existing marina on a state or federally designated wild and scenic river, which PB Pond is not. So in either of those cases, a mandatory trigger is not met with this particular project. Or based on an EAW, the comments and responses, the RGU can determine that the project has the potential for significant environmental effects. And that is where we're at today with the environmental assessment worksheet process. We'll go over what was found during that process, and then the council will make their decision on whether an EIS is needed. Some examples of projects that have required EISs. There's a list of them there. I won't go through the whole list, but as you can see, they're pretty significant projects that have a pretty wide spans of impact. I'm not aware of any residential development projects that have required an EIS in this area. So for this particular environmental assessment worksheet process, as Emily mentioned, the discretionary EAW is identified. So again, there are mandatory triggers for EAWs. This project did not meet those mandatory triggers, but city staff found that due to the location of the project, that it would benefit the city to have this document completed to provide more information on the potential impacts of the project. So the city and I assisted with completion of that EAW document. It was approved for distribution on January 31st. The public was notified of the availability of the EAW on February 6th. The EAW was distributed for a 30-day comment period, which ran from February 7th through March 9th, and comments were subsequently received through March 13th. The city responded to the comments and developed a findings of fact, which is included in your packet. And tonight is where we're at, where the city is making the determination on the need for an EIS. If it is determined that an EIS is not needed, the environmental review process at that point is complete for the state's process. There will be more review through the city's subdivision development review processes. So as I mentioned, there are several standard questions that are covered in EAW. Topics include land use and cover types, the permits that might be required for a project, geology and grading, water resources, habitat, the potential for contamination, water and sewer infrastructure, transportation, the potential for historic properties, the potential for visual, air, and noise impacts, and the potential for cumulative potential effects, which means how would this project interact with other projects in the surrounding area to create a significant impact. And in terms of this project itself, this was an 11.87 acre lot. The proposal is for subdivision into 4 single-family residential lots. Each lot would have future access to PV Pond, and one would require a future boardwalk across a wetland to access PV Lake. There would be a road that would replace an existing driveway. The proposal has a 720-foot cul-de-sac. Sewer and water would connect to the municipal system. The project would require approximately 1.88 acres of new impervious and approximately 2 acres of tree removal, and that does include both the roadway and the approximate areas of development pad. Any future docks that were proposed with the project would comply with Lake Minnetonka Conservation District rules. And this slide shows the concept plan for the project. So you'll see the cul-de-sac on the west side there, and then the 4 lots along PV Lake. And the one to the north would be the one that would require the boardwalk through the wetland. The EAW evaluated the potential impacts as resulting from the project, and it was found that there could be potential for impact to surface water resources such as PV Lake, the adjacent wetlands and shoreland, potential for public utilities such as stormwater, water supply and wastewater, and habitat such as tree removal, potential for impacts to bluffs, the shoreland, and the lake. And that chart there is just represents the before and after cover types for each of those categories of habitat. The EAW also outlined several permits that would be required, or approval processes that would be required should this development move forward. And the required approvals would cover resources such as surface waters, grading and soil disturbance, water quality, and public utilities. As I mentioned, the EAW went out for public comment. Comments were received through March 13th. The notification process included publication in the EQB Monitor, which is the state's official publication site. It included publication on the city's public notice webpage, and also email notification to state, local, and federal agencies. Comments were received from 3 governmental agencies, including the Minnesota State Historic Preservation Office, Metropolitan Council, Department of Natural Resources, and 6 members of the public. There were 6 residents that commented. 2 of those letters were in support of the project, and 2 expressed concerns over the project. Now, through these next slides, I'm not going to go through each individual comment. Those are in your packets along with the responses, but I will cover the general themes of the comments that were received on this development and on the EAW, and discuss what the impact is and what mitigation is would be provided if any was required. So one of the concerns was related to the proposed density of the project. As mentioned, the project would subdivide 1 lot into 4. The proposed lot density would comply with the city's zoning. The proposed dock density would comply with Lake Minnetonka Conservation District rules, and sewer and water would be extended via existing city systems, and those existing systems were found to have ample capacity for the proposed development. Additional comments were related to concerns over the potential for impacts to PB Lake and the adjacent wetland. There, as I mentioned, there was each lot would provide access to PB Lake. Construction would obviously change the land use and increase impervious surface, whereas there's potential for erosion and surface water runoff. Each of the future lot owners would have the ability to construct those docks. One of them, as I mentioned, would require a boardwalk through an adjacent wetland to reach the dock. In order to do either the docks or the boardwalk, the developer and the future landowners would need to apply for various local, state, and federal agency permits if any of that work was proposed. Those permit processes would ensure that impacts to those resources would be minimized, and those would also outline mitigation needs if any were determined to be required. Runoff from the proposed development would be treated to meet local and state standards prior to entering PB Lake. And erosion control best management practices would be required to be in place throughout construction to minimize the potential for erosion into surface waters. There were concerns related to the potential for impacts to wildlife and their habitat. Minor temporary impacts to terrestrial and aquatic species could occur during construction. No significant impacts are expected. Again, runoff from the proposed development would be treated to meet local and state standards prior to entering PB Lake, which would minimize the potential for impacts to aquatic species. Erosion control best management practices would be required to be in place throughout construction to further minimize potential for erosion. The city would review the developer's proposed seed mixes during the subdivision application process. If work were proposed either by the developer or by future property owners within PB Pond for construction of docks, the work would not be allowed to occur between May 1st and July 31st, and that is fish spawning season. And tree removal would be required to comply with both the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, meaning that if there were active nests in trees, they would not be able to be removed until the birds had left those nests, and Northern Long-Eared Bat Regulation, which typically requires winter tree removal. Speaking of, there were concerns related to the proposed tree removal. As I mentioned, approximately 2 acres of tree removal would be required to construct the project. This includes the proposed roadway and the estimated home lots. Tree removal on a steep slope or in the shoreland zone would be required to meet the city's tree preservation ordinance. Tree removal on a bluff, if proposed, would require variance. And again, as mentioned, that tree removal timing would need to comply with both that Migratory Bird Treaty Act and the Northern Long-Eared Bat Regulations. There were concerns related to the potential for impacts to the bluff. The developer has submitted a bluff determination that complies with the DNR's 2021 guidance. The developer has also further submitted an updated site plan that complies with the bluff impact zone and setbacks. This site plan would be further reviewed through this subdivision application process. The developer would need to comply with the city's tree preservation ordinance, and again, tree removal on a bluff, if that were proposed, would require a variance. There were concerns raised over the potential for impacts to archaeological or cultural resources, and to that, the developer would need to perform a Phase 1 archaeological resource assessment, which includes on-site investigation, and coordinate with the State Historic Preservation Office and Office of State Archaeologists regarding the results of that study. Avoidance or mitigation measures would be determined based on the results of that Phase 1 assessment. So to the findings of the document, there are 4 criteria considered when deciding if the project has the potential for significant environmental effects. The first is the type, extent, and reversibility of those environmental effects. And to that, the document was found to have adequately reviewed the type, extent, and reversibility of environmental impacts, and none were determined to be significant. The second criteria is the potential for cumulative impacts. And to that, there are no foreseeable future projects that would interact with this project to result in cumulative potential effects. The third criteria is the extent to which environmental effects are subject to ongoing regulatory authority. And to that, the potential impacts identified as part of the proposed Ferndale Bluff residential development can be addressed through either the subdivision application review process and or through regulatory agencies as part of permitting processes. And the final criteria is the extent to which environmental effects can be anticipated and controlled as the result of other available environmental studies, including other similar types of developments that have occurred in the area. And considering the results of an environmental review and permitting processes for similar projects, the city finds that the environmental effects of this project can be adequately anticipated, controlled, and mitigated through the existing subdivision review process and or other permitting processes. So based on the EAW, the comment letters, and the findings of fact, no additional information is required, and any potential impacts and mitigation will be addressed through the city and other public regulatory review and permitting processes. Based on those 4 criteria that I mentioned that are established by Minnesota rule, the potential for significant environmental impact does not exist with this project. So there are 3 potential actions that could come out of tonight. One is to adopt the negative declaration, which would mean that no EIS is required. A second option is to adopt a positive declaration, meaning that an EIS is required. For that to occur, we would need to understand what particular resource the council would have would feel that may have a significant impact occur to it, or what new or additional information is needed that hasn't been provided through the EAW process already. With either of those decisions, the applicant or those decisions can be appealed, whether it's a negative declaration or a positive declaration, and the appeal process would then go to state judicial court. The third option would be to table the decision, and again there we would just need to understand what new or additional information is needed in order to make a decision at a future meeting. So the recommended action is adoption of City Council Resolution 25-223, adopting the record of decision and making a negative declaration on the need for an EIS, meaning again that an EIS is not required.
Excellent, thank you. Questions of our consultants? No, thank you. So just to recap, the information that becomes available through an EIS versus in an EAW, could you explain just what information would we have in hand before moving forward in a project that we do not have currently?
Often it's all the same information. An EIS also often looks at socioeconomic impacts. The EIS would also require alternatives. Generally, alternatives are not, generally the final development is not necessarily one of the alternatives. Often what comes out of an EIS is just further mitigative measures to impacts that are going to occur. And again, either process, whether it's an EAW or an EIS, neither of them approve or deny a project. Again, they're really just planning documents so that the city or the RGU has adequate information when they move on to the next review processes.
Okay. So we are effectively, we're not approving any project here.
No.
We don't even have an application or a final application for us to consider with regard to a subdivision. This is simply saying, you've done the first part that what we've requested you to do. However this turns out down the road, this had to be done before we could even move forward to the next step.
Correct. So one of the things that will come out of this process is that the city, when they do go through the subdivision application process, will now have a list of several mitigation measures that they will be able to make sure are included in that subdivision application.
And there is one process that is ongoing, and that's, I apologize, I don't have the exact terminology, but it's for the historical artifacts.
Correct.
So that is in process.
Correct.
And we've had sites like that here in town previously. But then we put a process around that during construction. It may not even be relevant if the project doesn't go forward, but if construction were to move forward, we would put parameters in place for that particular issue as they move along.
Yes, that's correct. So if a resource were found on the site, there would be either avoidance or mitigation measures that would be put in place through the development process and then likely throughout construction as well.
And by state law, don't they have to stop construction and make certain notifications to the state and proper authorities?
Yes, if something were to be found during construction, they would have to cease construction immediately and contact the State Historic Preservation Office and Office of the State Archaeologist.
Okay, thank you. Right, any other questions at this juncture? So we do have, is the applicant here this evening?
Yes, the property owner is present and would like to speak.
Okay. I don't have their information.
I'm happy to say their name and invite them up if you'd like.
Yes, absolutely. Would the property, no? To answer questions as needed. Fantastic. Okay, thank you. We do have a few parties who are here this evening to speak on, I guess, the future of the property. I don't know if you're here to speak specifically to the EAW, because that's all we're considering this evening is the EAW and the negative declaration for the EIS. That's a mouthful. I think this may be the first time I've had to address this. So again, if you could come up, state your name, state your address, limit your comments to 3 minutes, that would be appreciated. And the first person this evening is Sue Schwalbach. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm Sue Schwalbach. I live at 510 Ferndale Road West, which is on the channel that goes back to Peavy Pond. And I think for many of us who've been in Wayzata for a long time, we've been knowing that this property is going to come up for sale at some time. We've been aware of it for years, actually. It's a beautiful place, and we know that the Capon family has loved to live there, and so here we are, and I think, frankly, surprised at the density issue that is being presented with this proposal. It's good. I think that you asked for an EAW, and it was very interesting reading that because I'd never even known such a thing existed. But it does raise questions, I think, that are yet to be answered, partly because it's a generic document that maybe applies to all kinds of pieces of property, maybe flat square ones and maybe long skinny ones, and maybe they have water on them or whatever, but this one happens to be not any of that. It's a hilly wooded piece of land that is going to be really remarkably altered with the idea of 4 houses on it. The reconfiguration that is going to happen here is interesting to look at if you go through the documents that have been presented. Number 1, it has wetland. Number 2, it has a bluff. And if you try to do some calculations based on kind of what's left that's buildable, it is what's forcing these 4 houses into a smaller bit of landscape. there are 11.87 acres, 2.3 of them are wetlands, which gets you down to 9.5 acres after that. And then whatever the acreage is of the bluff, I don't know that any of us know that, but we have to keep subtracting that because we don't build on a bluff. So that automatically says if we're going to put all of these things onto this land, including a road and 4 homes and building pads and driveways and a pond and the whatever all the other infrastructures are that require sewer and water and et cetera, we are going to be massively altering what this piece of land looks like. And I think when we recognize that, if we can get to the place where we subtract the bluff land also, we're going to see what all has to happen within a smaller parcel. It's going to be less than 8 acres. It doesn't matter that the whole parcel is 11 or almost 12. It's just where all of this work is going to happen is going to be in a pretty small area. And so the idea behind an EIS is to just recognize that the trucks and the digging and the grading and all of that is going to be big. And these vehicles need to get in and out. This soil needs to be stacked somewhere on that property. I don't know if they're going to haul it all out and then haul it all in, however that's all going to be managed. There was a sort of a discrepancy I found in the really beautiful letter that I thought the Capon sisters wrote that was really quite interesting. You're very expert, some of you, in your work, and that's encouraging to know that because that does help us think that you're being thoughtful about it. I've had my own personal experiences, not by education, but I've been involved in probably 15 or 20 different construction projects, from homes to hospitals to schools, and I've been aware of what it takes to put together a construction site. I've even been involved where we've had to rip out sidewalks and make them 6 to 15 inches narrower in order to accommodate the hardcover situation. So it's not a clean, easy process. It's complicated and it's messy and it makes a big mess, which is part of this idea of, does this project need an EIS because of so much that has to happen in really a relatively small area? And then this one thing that I'd add that's new, the daughters state on page 6, item 9A, we, the current owners, will not be grading for lots or building pads. They are not part of this project. We leave that work to future homeowners who will need to comply with all the city regulations with the intent to allow them to maintain as many trees as possible. Grading for the road would take place after the plat approval and before lots are turned over to new owners. So I think what they're saying is they're not seeing this project as dealing with the lots. They're seeing it as dealing with the infrastructure. Now, if you go to the EAW, what the developer states on page 3, item 6B is, and this is the question that's asked, it is asked, give a complete description of the proposed project and related new construction, including infrastructure needs. And the developer answers, in part, by saying the construction will involve tree removal and grading for lots, roadways, and utilities. And then it also says, it is anticipated that construction of the road, cul-de-sac, stormwater, pond, and utilities will be completed within one construction season, starting in the summer of 2023. Grading for lots will also occur during this time, though construction of the residential homes and docks may occur over multiple years. So those are two different ideas about how this project is going to move forward. And I think that if we just continue this idea about what this process is going to involve and whether we can mitigate runoff and all of that during this construction project, we just would have to be recognizing that we can't compare this project to anything else that's gone on in the city. it's not like anything else. It has all these extra characteristics to it that other parcels in the city do not have. And I think that's the reason that I think there are questions that still need to be asked about this project. Like how is this going to work when we can't touch so much of this acreage? How are we actually going to function? And how is this mitigation going to really be made to happen successfully? There's a little driveway right now. They're probably going to have to build a road. No, two cars can't pass each other on the driveway that's there right now. So I would encourage us to at least say, look, we need more information here. There's not enough, and I've read all of it.
Madam Mayor, sorry,
Yes,
just in
yeah.
terms of a time check, we're at about 7 or 8 minutes.
Okay, I'm sorry. So maybe the last
Wrap it up, please.
So maybe the last thing I'd say is to just heart Ken Dayton, who was one of the stewards of the land here in Wayzata for so long, and just help us remember his wisdom in developing the property along Ferndale.
Thank you. No, that's quite all right. Thank you. Again, though, so a question with regard to Panway, city project in town. We did an EAW for that, correct? We did not need an EIS for that? So that is going directly into the lake, correct? Okay. No, thank you. I was just trying to put pieces together of things we've looked at in the past. All right, next up this evening is Daniel Johnson. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Dan Johnson. My wife and I live at 437 Ferndale Road West. So we're on PV Lake and have lived there for about 7 years. And what I haven't seen, and I've written some emails that some of which made it into the meeting documents, but not my most recent points. But in all of what I am commenting on is, I feel like I'm ringing a bell a little bit about how this density will change the environment on PV irreversibly. You can't reverse this. It's a tiny little 9.5 acre pond, and we're looking at putting 8 boat slips on 400 feet of land. And it's got this very narrow 23-foot channel leading to it that does not allow 2 boats to pass. And so with fishing traffic in the spring and the current boats that are on it, it's a busy little place. And if you put more lots, we're going to add 8 boat slips. How does this gets worse? This problem gets worse. Panaway, we've noticed, living on PV, has created more paddle traffic, people coming from Wayzata Beach on paddleboards or in kayaks, paddling through that channel. And you encounter them in your motorboat going the other way, and you have to be very careful. So that's a good thing. It allows the residents of Wayzata and people that come to Wayzata as a function of Panaway going to PV to seek its solitude and out of the wind, and it's a nice place for them to visit. But that's going to change, and you can't reverse that once you change that. It's going to be a high traffic area in that channel, and already in the springtime, boats often have to wait on either side of the channel to let boat traffic come through, since only one can come through at a time. And that only is going to get worse. So I'm not seeing anything in either of these, EAW or EIS, did I get those right? That talks about how the environment on PV changes permanently with added density. And so I don't know how to assess that in either of these. Maybe one would do that more justice than the other, but I've seen nothing in what's been written that addresses what I'm talking about, which is the changing of that whole lake environment with this added density.
Thank you. So I think there's no doubt. I mean, we're not a stadium. We're not building a bridge over a river. However, there's undeniably impact, right?
Yes, there will be impact.
Environmental impacts, but I think where I'm struggling, and maybe folks in the audience are struggling, is what is the threshold? What is an actual measurement where we say, if you do X, we anticipate Y, and therefore we need more information? And I don't know, it may be more of an art than a science, but I think that's what I'm looking for, is at what point do we say, oh, wow, yes, this is going to have such significant impact that we need to invest years, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then here's beyond what we're already planning on doing for a proposed subdivision, which addresses a lot of these issues, right? U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, our permits, all of these other aspects. What are we missing? What is that one piece that says, yeah, this is kind of where we flip the switch and say, we absolutely need an EIS?
So I think one piece of information that I think gets a little convoluted here is that the environmental assessment worksheet or environmental impact statement is related to environmental impacts, natural resources, things like that. Where I hear some of the comments that I've heard are more related to the character of the area, which is not something that this document or an EIS would evaluate. So what the scope of a EAW or an EIS would be to look at whether or not a proposed development complies with the density question. Does it comply with the ordinance? In this case, it does. Do the docks comply with the existing rules? They do. The Conservation District allows for two boats per 50 feet of shoreline. They comply. Whether or not that meets the character of what the city or the other nearby residents would like to see is not part of this process and wouldn't be part of this process. That's the subdivision review process.
Thank you. Okay. That's helpful to understand. I appreciate that. All right. We have a few more comments. The next is from Phil Soren. Good evening.
Phil Soren, 532 Ferndale Road West. So it's good to be here in person, watching you guys on TV, at late night TV all the time. And so now I get to be here in person talking about this project.
You're very flattering, sir.
Yeah. So first of all, Samantha and her sisters deserve to develop this property. I mean, you know, they deserve to have some economic benefit, all that type of thing. We got to watch out what we're doing permanently to this beautiful property. So I understand that EIS may not be the right vehicle. I don't know how you guys will come out on that. But the developer they're working with, you know, he showed me his material, why he thinks he's the right one to do it, and he shows the property, the Jacobs property in Orono. If you drive over there, if we do that there, shame on us. I mean, the whole group here. That's what I'm really worried about. I just encourage the council and the staff to really work this project hard, help Samantha and her team where, do we need a road there? Can't use the driveway. Maybe it's a different size road or whatever. You're talking about trees earlier tonight. You're going to knock down more trees in this project than all the stuff you're going to work on for 6 years here. I mean, it's hundreds. It's not a few. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing there. So I'd encourage you to work with them on that type of thing. I wish they went for fewer lots. You know, I think it's a 2 or 3 lot. You could get just as much economic benefit, but that's their plan there. But so I encourage you to work with them on that as you go forward.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the comments. Well, and benefit of having a staff that has been through the ups and downs of each one of these development applications with us as they counsel applicants, and at the end of the day, it's up to the applicant to decide the direction they're ultimately going to go, and sometimes they prevail and sometimes they don't. Okay, the last blue card I have for this evening, Jeff and Stephanie Martha.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and council members and staff. My name's Jeff Martha. My wife Stephanie's here as well. We live at 520 Ferndale Road West, so directly across from the property. I think the speakers before me adequately described the special nature of the property. And so, basically my concern here is just a broader environmental look before we take down a forest. I mean, this is a small forest that we're talking about taking down. And so I don't know if an EIS is the right thing, but a broader scope, environmental review versus the 20 question checklist. And as the representative from the developer pointed out, I think I would like the further mitigation measures to be looked at in a broader scope, as the prior speakers were talking about, in terms of the pond, and because this is different than just how many lots you're putting on or how many houses you're putting on a lot. This is a forest we're talking about taking down and removing a lot of earth and all that. So we'd like to know the alternatives, and this is a, I don't know, $15, $20, $25 million project. I think a little bit of extra money invested in this environmental assessment is warranted, and I've seen a lot of both residential and commercial projects that I've been involved with in my business career, and it just seems like that 20 question checklist is not commensurate with the environmental, for a lot. We'd have to do a lot more environmental work for a smaller project than this, generally is what I've seen. And so I just disagree with the assessment there. And just to set the record straight, I think there were you said there were 6 letters that were written, 2 for, 2 against. It was 2 for, 4 against. So just to make sure the record's set right there for all the viewers like Phil that watch at home and couldn't see the slide.
Sure.
So
Yep, that's correct.
You misspoke on that one. So with that, that's all. It is a beautiful property, and I just hope we take the time and invest the time and money for the broader environmental assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Mayor, do you mind? I just want to do a clarification. Ms. Harwood represents the city, not the developer.
Yes, thank you. So I appreciate that clarification. What are other avenues available to us with regard to, there's the EIS path, and then obviously there are concerns, right? And as I think I can speak for the council here, we're always going to want to do the right thing, right, when it comes to the city. But if the EIS were not a path that the council wanted to take, what other options would the council have in terms of guiding how a piece of property like this were to be developed as part of the subdivision ordinance? Did that question make sense?
So in terms of additional ways to help guide, as the staff have spoken with me, and one of the things, and I think I mentioned this previously, is that there are various mitigation measures that we've already outlined in the EAW document and in the findings of fact that we'll create a list for city to have available while they're going through the subdivision review process. In addition to that, and I apologize, I forget the last commenter's name, I have also been through a lot of development projects, and there is a very extensive environmental permitting process that goes along with these types of projects, any development project, whether it's the watershed district or the city or the DNR or the Corps of Engineers or Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. There's, that permit table outlined what is required to be reviewed, and it covers everything from water resources to water quality to, utilities and transportation. So, I really do think that all of the potential environmental impacts from this project can be addressed through those existing processes. But in terms of ways to additionally help guide, I've already mentioned that I'll be providing a list of sorts of the different mitigation measures that we've outlined in these documents to city staff for that subdivision review application process when that begins.
So, question to staff. Which one's the cart, which one's the horse? Are these permits the cart or the horse relative to an application for a subdivision? I'm glad you get my humor.
I get it.
Because you know exactly where I'm going with this, which is, I mean, given the sensitivities to this site, if we don't have all of the mechanisms potentially in place, and we're not considering that tonight. Again, I just want to reiterate that. We're just talking about the EAW. But in the bigger scheme of things, it kind of relates also because, I'm going to speak for myself, I want to make sure that we are as careful and thoughtful and sensitive to how this property is going to be developed. And if it has to come through an EIS, and that's our only means, then, that's the direction I'm leaning. If we have all of these other tools available to us to make sure before we say, yes, you're approved for a subdivision, right? And we've done our checks and balances ahead of time, and then through that process of construction or grading, whatever the case may be, then that kind of lends me to think a different way. Did that question make sense?
Yes, it did. I think that how I'm viewing this project right now is that we have a property that's guided and zoned for residential use, and we will be reviewing a subdivision application that's going to trigger the discussion of all of this again. I've already created a very lengthy checklist of the mitigation efforts that Allison has outlined that will be necessary as part of that subdivision application review. What I predict would happen from that process is that we'll work through it, we'll go through the public hearing process, and what will ultimately bring forward are findings that relate to all of these environmental impacts. And there would likely be, if there was a recommendation for approval, a very long list of conditions and a very complicated development agreement. That is the mechanisms that we have authority to use at the city. And then we rely on these other agencies to follow through with their own regulations, which would be conditions of our potential approval if it goes that way.
So including some of the questions that have come up with regard to grading, and because that's, I know, something that we look at, right, is impact to bluffs and grading percentages and everything. So all of that would be addressed at a later time, but encompassed within the review process.
Yeah, I mean, that is really what the subdivision ordinance is there for, is to manage development in this way and manage applications like this to address all of these things. We benefit from having a worksheet like this done before we even start reviewing the subdivision, which will make this process, we'll have to be very thorough with this. There's a lot of detail to this one.
Okay.
And we have to be also mindful of just that it is a privately owned property that's platted this way as a residential property, and so we'll have to navigate those ordinances as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. Before I turn it over to council, any other questions? Questions of the applicant? No? Okay. Who would like to begin their deliberation?
Madam Mayor, be happy to start.
Thank you.
First off, I'd like to say I am a neighbor. I can actually see across through my back property and across the Doherty's that section of PV Pond, so it's rather close to me. Not in Ferndale, but close enough. And many of the comments, or at least a couple of them, are from people that I know. There are plenty of reasons to have concern about the environment in this project. Lots have been talked about, and they're all good reasons to be concerned. And I'm not comfortable with a lot of what is sort of in the plan about excavation and the dirt's going in and going out and all that. So I'm concerned about a lot of those things, but What's before us is none of that. We're not here to approve the plan, the concept, or any of those things. All we're here to do tonight is to see whether we want to trigger an EIS. And an EIS, I've come to learn, is something that's far bigger than anything that you would normally do for a project like this. It's for football stadiums and things of that kind of scale, vastly more expensive and time-consuming than we need to do for something like this. So we're not approving any of those things. We're not approving the subdivision. We're not approving a detailed plan. We're not here to approve any of that stuff. It's all going to come before us in the future. All we're here to talk about is, do we want to trigger an EIS? And I just don't see that we need to do that for this. All those concerns I just mentioned will come. I will voice them at that time. But right now, I think we don't need this.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Plekish. Anybody else? Yeah, Councilmember McDonald.
Thank you. Excuse me. I feel very similarly to Councilmember Plekish. I came into this meeting this evening thinking, why not? Why can't it hurt? This is a really important piece of property. It's beautiful. There's a lot of environmental resources there that should be considered. With learning more about this EIS, I also don't think it's the right avenue. Similarly to Mr. Martha's comment, I had a concern as well with the environmental assessment worksheet, which is the process it's going through, which is, you do the worksheet, you get the comments, and then you respond to the comments, and the loop stops there. So what's next? I thought the woman from the DNR, Melissa Collins, her letter was really thought-provoking for me, and I shared a lot of similar concerns that she laid out. While those comments were addressed, they felt kind of like a vague comment to her comments. So I agree with Councilmember Plekish. I think we just keep a really close eye on this. I'm glad to hear Director Gellner has this checklist in order already, and I too will be evaluating anything that comes to the council with just with all of these really important factors at mind. But I just think a years-long process that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars isn't maybe the best avenue for this. So I am going to agree with the consultant's recommendation to not go forward with the EIS.
Thank you, Councilmember. Next, Councilmember Parkhill.
So, did it again. So I looked at it, I was like, thanks, Sue, Mr. Schwalbach, for your comments. In your letter, very thorough, approximately 784 truckloads of stuff going in and out, 2 acres of trees. I don't know how many trees are per acre, but let's say 100. And we have spent the last 2 months talking about 10 trees on, 1.1 acre. So I think Mr. Soren said it well, that we couldn't possibly replace these trees in the next 10 years with all our conversations. So we do need to be careful. I'm worried about monitoring the construction and flows into the lake and all that, but this isn't the time for that. I think to answer Mr. Anderson's question about the cultural aspects, or I don't know if that was the exact word, but the impact to the actual lake with the number of boats, I think that comes up in the subdivision ordinance that we'll be getting, and that will talk about trees, any adverse effects, fit with the community, it's just the overall impact of dividing this into 4 lots. This is not our last look at that, and I just have come to the conclusion that I don't think the EIS is the right path right now, and we'll have plenty of time to address some of these other concerns in the future.
Excellent. Thank you, Councilmember Parkhill. Councilmember Iverson.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the list for future reviews and approvals. And as I was listening to the residents, just jotting down some notes and understanding the potential impact, I want to just make sure, so I see in it that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services has already looked at the endangered species, if that's correct. It says that that's obtained.
So the Fish and Wildlife Service has not been consulted, but we have reviewed the official lists. That's where the northern long-eared bat comes from. That's a state endangered species, or excuse me, a federally endangered species.
Okay, so help me understand that, because this is the first time I've gone through any of this, so I need a little education. So am I to, does that say that no endangered species are there and none will be impacted?
So there is potential for an endangered species there, the northern long-eared bat. There are processes in place that are avoidance processes. So I mentioned the winter tree clearing that would avoid that habitat.
Okay. Because I think one of the concerns that I butt up to the wetland, it's called the Nature Center. And just to make sure that when we go through this last list, it seems like this is the direction the council is going to go, is to not do an EIS, but to make sure that we do our due diligence to really understand the impact to the nature. We watched the osprey come back to the Nature Center the other night. They go back to the same place that they nest year after year after year. So I want to make sure, and I don't know if there's an agency on this list, staff, that will be able to ensure and do some due diligence and some work so that we really understand the impact to the nature and the trees and the environment and the birds. And again, the osprey is only one that I can speak to. I'm sure there's a lot of other wildlife out there that's going to be impacted by the reduction of these potential trees. I agree. I don't know if EIS is the right direction to go. I'm just a little bit concerned that the list that's in front of us may not be thorough enough, and that perhaps we need to add some other things to make sure we fully understand.
Sorry, which page are you on, Councilmember?
Page 141.
Oh, for the reviews and approvals?
Yep.
Okay. Is there something in addition that you would consider adding?
I don't know the agency that would do this, but what is the impact to Marilee, you can help me, birds that migrate, wildlife that migrates to the same location year after year after year, and what's the potential impact by the reduction of 2 acres of trees to those species that do that? I don't know the name of the agency that does that, so that's my big, I have a lot of concerns like the other council members, but I think that will all come in front of us in due time. And I believe that everyone on the council will do their due diligence to make sure that this is done in the correct manner with the least amount of impact. So I don't know if the EIS is the best avenue for that. But again, I will be watching this list to make sure that we're taking good care of our wildlife, because it's being reduced significantly. So they need to go somewhere.
Thank you, Councilmember Iverson. So I do agree that the EIS is not the avenue for this project, but a very concise list, as Ms. Gellner previously mentioned, is going to be necessary, and the ability for us to understand the impacts of this project before it comes to us is going to be critical. And so my ask of the council, we don't know if this is going to be coming before us in 6 months or a year or potentially 2 years, but is to think about, right, what are those, if it's something at the appropriate time that you want to consider moving forward with, what are those, what is the criteria for approval? And let's talk about those and incorporate those at the appropriate time. And I do believe that, I want to thank our consultant for putting this together. It's a good first step in terms of identifying the things that we need to keep an eye on. There is so much ahead of us in terms of, as Councilmember Parkhill put it, we talked for over an hour, and for the last 3 months at least, about 10 trees and 3 lots. So I'm sure we'll see y'all back here a few more times. But it's to say we want to be thorough, and we take it incredibly seriously. It will not be taken lightly. And by the same token, we want development, but we want thoughtful development. And that comes not just for, what a house looks like, but the impacts to the environment and the neighborhood. And in this case, the neighborhood is broad. But by the same token, we have to think strategically and in a way that is consistent with the values that we put forward as a community. So I'll stop there because we'll be talking so much more about this. And I would just say, to staff, as we consider moving forward, or as you're working with the applicant, being able to point them to discussions we've had on other development projects, things that we've traditionally been concerned about, that the community has been concerned about. It's a lot, but I know you guys do a really good job of encapsulating that. And the last thing we want is for people to waste their time and their money, but at the end of the day, we'll make that decision based on what's presented, and that's ultimately their choice, regardless of the counsel that you may provide. But at this point, for this evening, we need a motion for Resolution 25-2023 to adopt the record of decision and making a negative declaration on the need for an EIS for the property at 565 Ferndale Road West. Thank you.
And Madam Mayor, just for the record, that draft resolution is 25-2023.
Did I say 2523?
I thought you said the address there, but just, that's the number of the draft resolution.
Yes, thank you. Would someone care to make that motion?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. Thank you. That closes out new business, and it takes us to the city manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Try to be brief. It's been a long evening. A couple things going on. I think for all the residents out there, you've probably noticed a new waste bins. The Republic Services is still in their process of changing them out, so the last day is tomorrow. So hopefully everything has gone swell. We haven't had too many calls. So just FYI, if you've noticed some changing of the bins, and I think tomorrow is the last day to put out your old bin, and then that stops. So just if you want more detailed information, go to our website. It's all online, or give Public Works a call too. As Mary Lee mentioned very eloquently, we have Earth Day celebration here at City Hall on April 22nd from 1 to 3. And then next week we have our another wine pull at the Wine and Spirits, April 27th from 5 to 7 p.m. The wine pull is benefiting Secondhand Hounds, which is a great, I know.
I love them.
So you give $20 essentially, and you get to pull a mystery wine, and all the wine is $20 to $70 wine. So it's good stuff.
Secondhand Hounds is a rescue.
Yes.
Yes.
And all the
They're
proceeds
wonderful.
then go to them. So
That's
it's an awesome event.
That's where my old dog
27th, yep. And then lastly, I just want to say thank you very much to Liv Lasky, our communications coordinator, and Fred Miller downstairs. We've had some technical issues over the past few meetings, and I'm proud to say that we've had a stellar evening. It's all been because of their hard work, so thanks to them. And that's all I have.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, hats off to them. It's so much better to be able to see the screen when it's not pink. Yes, well, wonderful. Anything else from any members of the council? No? Any news to share? No? All right. Well then, how about a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We are adjourned.